Um, Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining today. On behalf of the Online Events Committee, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's event. My name is Karthik Manikam. I'm a PhD candidate in the Economics Department at the New School for Social Research and a member of the IAFE Online Events Committee as well as the Young Scholars Committee. Um, This event will be held in English, and there is Spanish interpretation as well, which you can find by using the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen in the toolbar. It's the little world-looking icon. Today's event is the first of a series we're putting together titled Qualitative Methods in Feminist Economics, Advancing Methodological Pluralism. As this is a Zoom, and today's event is titled What Can Qualitative Methods Bring to Feminist Economics? As this is a Zoom meeting and not a webinar, it's a friendly reminder to keep yourself muted. There will be a Q&A section of this event in which we will invite you to raise your hand using the hand function to ask questions. Please also feel free to put questions and comments and share resources throughout the chat. Um, so without further ado, it is my pleasure to first introduce our panelists today. Shrishti Yadav, Assistant Professor in Economics at Azim Premji University in Bangalore. Danielle Guito, Associate Professor at the School of Economics at the University of Bristol, UK. Alessandra Mettatri, Professor in Global Development and Political Economy at SOAS London. And finally, I'd like to introduce our moderator and one of the originators of this new series, Shiba Tajani, Senior Lecturer in International Development at King's College London. Shiba, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Karthik. Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to all of you to this event. Great to see so many people who've joined us today. I'm very pleased to be introducing and moderating this event. This feels very personal for me because I've found the methodological narrowness of economics frustrating and limiting for the kind of research I wanted to do ever since the time I was a graduate student. And I pursued this issue of methodological narrowness in my own research later, and I found that feminist economics was actually not very different from mainstream economics in that sense, and that it had become more quantitative over time and tended to rely even more heavily on econometrics as an evidentiary strategy than what it did in its early days. So while many of us are heterodox economists and we have pushed orthodox theoretical boundaries, it's clear that methodologically that boundary pushing has been much harder to do. Many of us, myself included, don't have the training in methods other than quant. And often our own unconscious positivist assumptions make us overly sort of concerned about things like subjective bias or causality, generalizability, etc. And of course, there is a problem that economics self-identifies as a quantitative discipline, which also makes it difficult to publish and to progress in your career if you are, using qualitative methods. But as a result of this narrowness, we are losing a lot of what is messy and intriguing and potentially revealing about our research subjects, in my opinion. And qualitative methods can open a whole new dimension for us, I think, in terms of the kinds of questions we can ask, the concepts we can construct and work with. I think it can bring greater sensitivity to and deeper understanding of our research subjects and also prompt us to ask questions about the assumptions and values that we bring into our research. So the idea behind this event was to start a conversation about all of this, not only about what qualitative research can bring to economics, but particularly to feminist economics. As feminists, we have explicit political commitments. We want to promote social change. We want to be more reflexive about our research. And, this is an opportunity for us to begin to think about how to incorporate these more consciously into our research practice. And, this is not to say that we should be discarding quantitative methods and that they have nothing to offer. They are, for instance, very useful in identifying broad structural patterns. Rather, the larger point is that methodological plurality can both enrich knowledge production in economics and our practice as feminist researchers. And adopting a stance that is more interpretivist, can allow us to operationalize a more reflexive and, dare I say, more feminist philosophy in our research practice, whether we use quantitative or qualitative methods. So that's my thinking on this. And with this, I again want to reiterate for those who've joined us just now that this event is the first in a series of conversations about qualitative methods that we will be hosting. The online events committee alongside the Young Scholars Committee in IFE will be hosting these, and the succeeding events will be a series of interviews with individual scholars who are experienced qualitative researchers from whom we hope to learn from, and we hope to develop our own community of practice through this kind of activity. And for those of you coming to Cali for the IFE conference, I will also be moderating another roundtable with another set of researchers on qualitative methods in feminist economics, and I hope to see you there if you're coming. So today, though, we are very lucky to have three esteemed panelists with us today. And as it turns out, they're all economists, and they're going to talk to us about how they swam against the tide and struck out with qualitative methods. So very, very pleased and honored to have you with us today. And I'm going to begin by inviting each of the panelists, starting with Srishti, followed by Danielle and Alessandra, to present their opening remarks on what qualitative methods can bring to feminist economics.
All right, I'm just going to share my screen. Am I in full screen? Not yet?
No, not yet.
Just a moment.
Still not full screen. Yeah. I think you can go like this, Srishti. We can still see. Yeah.
Right. I'll maybe go ahead with this. So, hi everyone. I'm honestly thrilled to be part of this conversation. First of all, congratulations to IAFI for taking this initiative. I think it's much needed. And I'm just extremely excited to be on this panel with Shiba, Danielle, Alessandra, all of whose work I have personally benefited a lot from. What I thought I would do with the opening remarks is to sort of start with sharing with you all a larger picture of where qualitative methods stand in economics today. Essentially, this is with Amit Basole and Smita Ramnarayan. I was recently part of this, the revision of this chapter titled Qualitative and Ethnographic Methods in Economics. It appeared in the Handbook of Research Methods and Applications in Heterodox Economics. This chapter originally was published in 2016. We were working on a revision. And for this, we essentially surveyed 10 top economics and development journals, both heterodox and mainstream. You can see the list on the screen. We looked at every single article in every single issue in the years 2016, 17, and 18. And we essentially categorized articles based on whether they use qualitative methods or not. Now, here, for the purposes of this study, we restricted qualitative methods to only ethnographic methods broadly. So we included, interviews, focus group discussions, participant and non-participant observation. And what we found was not very encouraging. We found essentially that in the heterodox journals, about 5% of the total research employs qualitative methods. In mainstream journals, it's under 1%. And the overall figure, the overall percentage share is, you can see, pulled up entirely by World Development, which is a interdisciplinary journal. And it, by its nature, it invites contributions from various disciplines. So it's not burdened by the quantitative bias in econ in that sense. Within the research that was done using qualitative methods, we see that when we look at how much of this was done by quote unquote economists, so people who have econ PhDs, that number goes down, particularly, for example, if you look at the heterodox journals. And then the last column will show you how much of the qualitative research was done by econ PhDs in economics departments. And again, the number goes down further. So we're not trying to define who's an economist or any of that, but the point was to sort of indicate that the space for qualitative methods is definitely limited in economics. So you're more likely to practice qualitative methods if you're outside an econ department, and you're much more likely to practice qualitative methods if you have a PhD in a discipline other than economics. Of course, the panelists today are an exception to this. But yeah, so I'll just leave you with this big picture for a moment here, because we found this to be quite striking.
Thank you so much, Srishti. Really a set of very clear results that give you a good sense of what's really happening in the discipline, right? Interesting also, world development is so much heavier, such a big difference between mainstream heterodox and world development. So development studies is doing much better. Um, Thank you so much. Danielle?
Hello, everyone. Let me share the screen. Can I just check you can see my slides?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you everyone for the invite. Honestly, I'm thrilled to be at this event with you, and I think to see how many participants we have on this call really proves the point that there is so much interest in qualitative methodologies and how we should pursue this further. So it's really a pleasure to be here, and I think the discussion will be amazing. So I have a set of slides. I think they're actually quite long, but probably they'll be helpful for our discussion later on. And I just wanted to add a few more thoughts on the topic of the day about qualitative research methods in economics. And not only we just had evidence from Shruti how the situation is and how we have a long way to go and such a long battle to fight for the presence of qualitative methodologies in economics, but also, and I think this reflects some of my own thoughts on the usage of the method, is we do have that wrong view of economics as being mainly a quantitative discipline. And I really like one of the works by Philip Mirovsky, who's a philosopher in economics, and he discusses a lot of the philosophy of mathematics in economics and the wrong usage of mathematics in economics. And he has this passage where he says that if economics were to be naturally quantitative, then we wouldn't see so much controversy over economic entities and economic concepts. Things like prices or value or capital, utility and information. We need to also unpack economic elements and economic realities in a qualitative way. And I think this is what this space that we have in heterodox economics can give us to open up a little bit the conversation. So because heterodox approaches, we tend to see the economy as a much wider process, a social process, and understanding the relations and the power struggles of social provisioning beyond market relations, beyond market prices. This allows for a greater diversity of methods for us to use. And I come from a history of economic thought background, and what really strikes me is that economics hasn't been always quantitative, dominated by quantitative methods. We do have a long tradition in economics of qualitative methodologies, which come from American institutionalism, from political economy, from the historical schools, from Latin American structuralism, dependency theory, and also with the links that we have developed over the decades with other disciplines coming from anthropology, economic geography, development studies. So I think this really enriches the discussion, and we don't want to replace quantitative methodologies. What we want to do is to have our own space to develop qualitative research in economics, because they complement questions and they complement things that quantitative research cannot do. And I think that's where it's important to have that epistemic stance. And so I mentioned, I'm just going to say some on the methods that I use on qualitative historical methodologies. So coming from history of economic thought, it was through that field that I started to discover discussions on methodology. Then I discovered heterodox economics, then I discovered feminist economics. But it was through history that it also allowed me to see that not necessarily because you use a certain method, it allows for criticism. So the method can help you to bring that criticism, but you need more. You need also the critical stance of the research that you're doing and the aims and what you want to do with the research that you develop. So what I do for qualitative methodologies in historical research is to really bring and collect, so interpret that data from the past. And data can have so many shapes and sources. It can be archive research documents. It can be spoken word, oral histories. It can be historical artifacts, images, statues, to understand and being able to interpret that past phenomena and look at this in economic terms. So this is what I try to do in my research, so to really uncover the meaning process and dynamics and experiences. And this is what I think qualitative research can really contribute. This really also helps me to answer some of the questions that I want to answer in my research. And I think this is what qualitative research is so important, to understand the how questions. So how ideas were marginalized, why were they left aside, what were the institutional conditions, what was the context that hindered a certain form of thinking. So these are some of the things that I do. I know we're going to continue the conversation, so can I just ask Sheba and Karthik, should I stop here or should I continue for a couple more minutes?
So I thought maybe since we had, decided 5 minutes, if we can turn over to Alessandra and then we can come back. Danielle, does that work?
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, thank you. But thank you so much for, reminding us what kind of questions we can begin to answer using qualitative methods, historical methods in this case, and also of the diversity of data sources that we can tap into that we usually actually tend to ignore as economists. So thanks for that, Danielle. And Alessandra, floor is yours. Karthik is going to be sharing your PowerPoint. Thanks, Karthik.
Thank you. Thanks so much to IAFI to have me here and to Sheba, Kartik, Pauline, and all those that were involved in the organization of the sessions. I know how much labor gets into that. It's an interesting question for me because it comes with my coming out as an economist that I think very few people know. I was formally trained in economics for such a long time. When I think about it, it's just, I would say something about the reasons why I use qualitative methods then in the first place. So if we can go to the next slide, what I would like to really focus my 5 minutes on is not so much around the single qualitative methodologies we have. I think this is a very sort of a well-read public, including those that just come for the sessions. We know that we have a plethora of qualitative methods that we can use, despite the fact that economics silos and do not really use much of them, as we learned from Shristi. And indeed, we can add a lot with that. I mean, Danielle has mentioned historical methods, but we can think about ethnography, economic ethnography. We learned a lot through that. There is sort of political sociology, classic use of interviews, life histories, work histories, and I could go on. But what I'm really interested here is in the process of synergetic use of qualitative material, how much we learn in political economy, because it's really what adds the political, right, to the economy. Because if it comes down to the study of power relations, these are more captured at the granular level as dynamic and relational, through us focusing on those relations that mostly qualitative methods can give us. And because feminist political economy is concerned with the study of the relational, given the nature of patriarchy and the intersectional inequality we are concerned with, of course, this synergetic use of methods is actually fundamental. In the past, I referred to this, even when I started my PhD journey, as the orchestration of sources, right? So that how you make an orchestra play, which in a sense also sets us some differences with the classic approach we have to mixed methods. I saw my good friend Jeff posing the question in the chat already. Oh, so what about mixed methods? Well, I think the synergetic use of qualitative material is slightly more than mixed methods, because with mixed methods, you recognize the benefits for the knowledge of social phenomena to actually utilize different methods of analysis at some point. But I would say that the synergetic use gets us to a different level. If I can get the new slide, please. So one person that was very good in this reflecting on this process of orchestration has been the late sociologist of labor, Michael Burawoy. And he actually theorized, as you know, all this in the 90s, what he called the extended case method. And I think he had a little bit of what I'm trying to sort of convey here, that it's not just mixed method, but it's a deep engagement with the social phenomena you want to study, and an engagement that requires you the synergetic use of different methods of knowledge and discovery that are not positivistically approached in a sense of building knowledge in a statistical way, right, or in a positivist way, but instead in what he referred to as a reflexive way, in a way in which knowledge is built incrementally. So not only we adopt different methods, say ethnography, say interviews, say narratives. In feminist economics, we can now add time use surveys to all of that, because time use surveys can be used quantitatively, but we know that we can also use them qualitatively. We have a beautiful paper in the Journal of Grand Change, in an issue that we curated by Smriti Rao and a group of great IAFE colleagues that in fact make this point. But here we can just build this knowledge incrementally so that the whole gives something more than the single part. This, of course, was used massively in class analysis studies, but of course, it serves very well the purpose of feminist economics and feminist political economy, if I can get to my final slide. So how is it that we feminize the extended case method? Of course, is by bringing to each of the components, but also to the synergetic overall outcome of the components, this feminist lens that we need to apply. And that, of course, for me, it might mean someone that is particularly interested in social reproduction and its impact on work, how we can have a view of relations of domination that cross the productive and reproductive divide. But in practice, you will feminize each and every step of the process, so feminizing each method used. So for instance, if I'm to study a factory, to analyze in detail the conditions of work that emerge as a result of the processes of feminization that one might explore looking at work, feminizing the compounded outcomes of the overall qualitative findings you have, for instance, interviewing exporters, which I've done for a long time, and trying to sort of reflect on their own way to sort of gender this shop floor and how these add to the other information you have, but then also inductively go back and sort of reflect on what it says to the very economic category of analysis that we deploy, so that we also take this on the ground knowledge all the back up to theory and to categories, because ultimately that is where the big game changer processes are played. So we have, in fact, with several IAFI members, Sara Stevano, there is Lorena Lombardozzi and others, I curated a book years back, Marx in the Field, where we try to exactly analyze in the feminist contribution in the volume how you can engage in this process of deploying certain methods so that then they speak back then to categories. And I'm trying to do this also in a project of mine that I'm just currently at work on, remapping Narsapur's lace makers, so going back to Maria Mia's early site. And all these reflections that I'm putting forward here on the feminization of the case methods, I'd like to highlight that I'm developing together with Aisha Arslan, and I hope we will have something for this public in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alessandra. I really liked the term that you used, orchestration of sources, which seems to be, very apt to describe what you're trying to say. And it seems to me that, as economists, we also need to get used to dealing more with uncertainty and with not knowing and with experimenting. Uh, we can't get these neat parameters and coefficients for our, regression equations, and this just kind of exploratory kind of approach, right, to even discovering sources is really useful. So thanks for highlighting that. Uh, all right, so this is very exciting because each one of our panelists, has expertise in a particular kind of qualitative research. So we're very glad we have this diversity of experience. And since all of you are economists, I thought we might start off by, talking about what drew you to qualitative methods in your own research journey. We know that it's not easy, being trained as a good economist to pursue qualitative methods. So how did you get started on this? What drew you to this, and how did you get training to work with qualitative methods? Srishi, you want to go first?
I had to use qualitative methods because the area that I was interested in was agrarian change. And for agrarian change, that was the defining method in a sense. Well, not qualitative methods necessarily, but definitely a mix of survey and ethnography seemed to be, what some of the stalwarts of the field had been doing. This is the kind of stuff that Barbara Harris White calls field economics. And so that's the kind of work that was my interest. Training, there wasn't any. But I was fortunate to have done my master's at Jawaharlal Nehru University, where there were a couple of scholars who did agrarian studies. And so, in a couple of courses, they would take us for very short field stints, mostly doing surveys. But that's where we got the first taste of fieldwork. And after that, it was just doing it yourself and learning on the field and making mistakes and still doing it. Yeah.
And you still got support through your dissertation, PhD for that. I mean, you successfully published from it.
So one thing that helped me was finding supervisors, maybe even outside of your core department, who have experience working with qualitative methods and therefore would be able to offer some insight on, for example, the interview schedule that you've created. So that did help. And then turning whatever you're coming back with from the field, turning that into actual insights. I had to say this is where journals helped as well. I was very lucky to have good reviewers on my first couple of articles who actually helped me think through and rethink. And that iterative process is how I learned to make sense of what I'd seen on the field.
Thanks, Trishti. So that torment that you experienced after reading your reviewers' comments, that all counts to something. It helps. It does help. All right. Thank you, Danielle.
Yeah, thanks for the question. How do I got interested in this in the beginning? I think it was through history. So my interest in economics was through history. And history inevitably is a much more plural field, right? You have so many historiographical methods. There's a much wider diversity on what counts as research methodology. So I started to get interested through that. And when I think I was quite baffled to see that there weren't many qualitative methods in economics, apart from maybe history and development and some, let's say, the usual softer fields. And I remember that when I started to develop that interest and I wanted to develop it further through my undergraduate studies, then a master's, I always got the feedback from most of my professors saying, well, but if you do qualitative research, you're going to be looked down because everybody sees that as it's just easier research. Most people that do qualitative research are normally bad at mathematics. It's not going to be seen as rigorous, so maybe you want to do something else. So I was quite shocked to see that even if you develop that interest, normally not many people will support you in economics. But I was lucky enough to do an interdisciplinary PhD. So I did a PhD in political economy and public policy. And we had to do some credits in other social sciences departments. And that's where I started to go in science, technology, and society studies, in sociology and political philosophy. And that's where I was able to get better training, a more formal training in, let's say, doing interviews or doing some more document analysis, case study research, ethnography. And that's how I started to develop an interest. I do have to say, though, that I think formal training is important, but I think the sort of work that we do in the associations are also crucial. So workshops that I did with YSI, with AHE, with IAFI, with other associations when I was a PhD student was so crucial for me to develop those things and to also find like-minded people that do that research as well. So I think this is key to be able to develop those methods and keep the research alive.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. So this intersection with other disciplines seems to be an important thing coming out in both of your remarks. And I have to say, I got the same reaction when I wanted to do fieldwork. What do you mean? Economists don't do fieldwork. It's not really economics if you do fieldwork. So that was a reaction I think many of us
Yeah,
have got.
they say, oh, your results are not representative enough. Like, how can
Yeah.
we reproduce those? But that's not the question that we want with qualitative research.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a different set of cognitive values, but there is, yeah. Alessandra, if we can turn to you.
Yes, well, I did move to another discipline because I was quite
Effective.
dissatisfied with economics. So my PhD was in global development, and I did work with the political economists as well as with the economic geographers. That was a game changer. And of course, because there is a commonality, I would say, in the story of some of us panelists here. Of course, Barbara Rhys-White had a huge impact on my own trajectory with their idea of fieldwork economics. But mostly it's the field that teaches you what works or not. I worked for 2 decades on garment and textile industrial clusters, and there is simply missing information once you arrive in loco and try to do a purely quantitative analysis. So we were left with directories, there contained applications of companies, they were entirely non-representative of the number of units there. There was nobody that actually collected information on the number of firms in each place. So the holy grail of statistical production, that is to know the universe out of which you need to sample for having anything remotely representative, was simply not there. So that at that point you need to snowball mostly, and you could try to sort of avoid ultra biases by having multiple ports of entry, so not to just follow a simple lead into the field. But basically, you have to construct the data from the start, as an anthropologist would do, even if you were interested in the more economic relations. And beside Barbara, I would say that I learned a lot from a bunch of JNU early mentors. Ravi Srivastava was indeed one, and the people in all his unit were crucial for me developing what then would become a more consistent methodology to approach the places. And you will know in some parts of the chain you have to use semi-quantitative questionnaires. In other parts of the chain you can't, and you need to go for ethnography. Like in the lower rungs of the chain, you really work as an anthropologist. You're not even able to use individual interviews. So I just come back from Narsapur in March. It was impossible to pretend to have a single interview with the women workers because it's not how they work. So the qualitative method itself is a lens into the very process you want to study. You cannot force it. These women work together and they wanted to talk to me together. So it was something that also taught me about the process of production. The way in which I was trying to sort of get information was not really apart from the phenomena that I wanted to study. So these are just some of the reasons why I think it's so great to be trained or to self-train, to stumble upon qualitative methods and to learn as you go.
I hope some of what you said will come back to when we talk about positionality in a little bit. But thank you for that. So, as I said earlier, each of you brings a particular expertise in qualitative methods. So, Srishti, you conducted semi-structured field interviews in Haryana and rural India for your dissertation on agrarian class and caste relations. Danielle, your work is on the history of economic thought, and you've done archival work on Robert Lucas's policy agenda, as well as economist engagement with Rawls' theory of justice in the 1970s. And Alessandra, as you mentioned, you've done decades of multi-sided fieldwork on garment global value chains in India, what you call the sweatshop regimes, and you've looked at the factory floor, at home-based work, and at social reproduction, right? And the intersection of those sites. So could each of you perhaps reflect on what the use of these methods has brought to your research, pointing to both strengths and limitations? And follow-on a question from that: would it have been possible to pose and answer the questions that you have tried to answer using quantitative methods? Like, is there a tension there, and what that could have looked like? So, you can answer both, one, whatever you like. Should we go in the same order again?
Thank you, Shiba. So, in terms of what qualitative methods allowed me to do was ask essentially questions of class analysis and questions of the process of agrarian change. So even though my fieldwork was essentially a one-time fieldwork in a sense, what I was looking at was a moving picture. What I wanted to look at was the moving picture and not just how things stand at a moment in time. And my survey instrument allowed me to look at the moment in time, but it was the observation and the semi-structured interviews that allowed me to make sense of the process. By, as Alyssa said, by going through multiple points of entry, by getting as many, so you understand the social sort of gradation. So you go into as many, entry points as possible to get the conflicting pictures, and then you try to make sense of it. It allowed me to make sense of how people associate themselves with different types of work and what is the social standing of different types of work, and how that might explain movement away from agriculture, but not necessarily away from land. Why factory work is not desirable for dominant caste men. Why women have master's degrees, but they are not working. Why there is continued sort of, animal husbandry being practiced, even though every year you're losing money from it. So these phenomena, which on the face of it might seem running counter to theory and running counter to your, assumptions, you can actually get insight into these through these kinds of, field insights. And even making sense of the survey for me, knowing each and every household having that memory of visiting each and every household and my conversation with them, to me was as important as the numbers that were on my Excel sheet in terms of when I was actually doing the class analysis. So what that brought, I think that there's no substitute. And in that sense, even the questions that I was asking were shaped by the fieldwork itself. I went in with certain broad themes that I knew I wanted to explore, but exactly what I was going to come out with, I think you can never tell with fieldwork. So there is a certain open-endedness there, which that is the beauty of fieldwork. That is the stuff that you can actually never do with quantitative and with secondary data sets. With secondary data sets, you look at the variables available and then you pose the question, which is workable. Here, you go out and you see and you talk and you listen. Mostly you listen, you don't talk. And then the questions happen, the categories change, as Alyssa said. Limitation was the lack of resources, because econ doesn't systematically provide resources for long-term fieldwork. I had to keep mine very limited. So it was a 2-month fieldwork. I would have really liked to do something longer and more extensive. But to me, that was the big limitation, is trying to get as much out of a short period as possible, which is not great. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Srishti. Danielle?
Thanks. I'll ask for permission to share the remainder of my presentation,
Yes,
because I think my
please.
answers, the pictures sometimes speak more than words.
Sure,
So I'll
please.
share images of things that I do, which probably are going to be helpful with the conversation. So I work on a variety of methods. Can you see my presentation?
Yes. Please.
Thanks. So I work on a variety of methods, mostly, historiography, archival and document research, and also oral histories. And I think to complement what Srishti was saying, text and people, they speak differently, right? So it's the beauty of qualitative research is that we can work with different sources and be able to triangulate them and see how they flesh out findings differently. And in history is to see how that also evolves over time. So what I think it's nice about this research and the things that I'm trying to look into at the moment is how, so things like not just process and class, but institutions, power relations, and things that normally we tend to leave it secondary or hidden in economics, they really come out when you do qualitative research. So one example that I have, so this is some recent research that I did, which was on how economics education in the UK has evolved in the post-war, so 60s to the 90s. And I was looking more into the curriculum development. So how was critical education implemented? How things like Marxist economics or feminist theory, or things that are not really the usual mainstream in economics, they were implemented in economics in the UK. So instead of talking to people, the research that I did for this project looked like this. So I had a trolley of thousands of pieces of paper that were typed, and they were mostly meetings from committees, both from the Department of Education and from universities, that they were kind of setting the guidelines of what was supposed to be taught. But then also the sort of field work or the archival research that I did was also in the archives of universities. So I was looking into how content was being implemented. So what were these universities doing? How were they implementing this sort of novel things in economics? So there is one photo, so the third one here from to the right. Here we had from one of the universities that I visit, they had a very big curriculum on courses in economics, spanning from the economics of the Soviet Union to planning studies to economics of the household, environment, economics. So this allowed me to see certain things that I would never be able to do with quantitative research. Maybe I would be able to find maybe some statistics or student numbers, but it wouldn't be able never to flesh out the actual content of what they were doing. So I think this is what qualitative research can really give us, to dig deeper on the whys and hows, on how things happen, the institutions, the processes, who were involved, how this happened. Even if you had greatest conditions and everything was working out, why didn't it work? Or when did it stop? What hindered? So, and here's where I started to see the politics and the discussions, going back to meeting minutes and site visits that they were doing in the 70s. I was really able to see the change in the UK higher education sector with that. So this is, I think it's a nice example on how this research can be done historically.
Amazing. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you for taking us on this journey with you into the archives. Alessandra?
Yes, thanks both to my fellow speakers because I'm enjoying this very much. Well, for me, because I was concerned with the construction of data when none was there or very little was there, it just goes without saying what qualitative methods have brought about. But also, I would say more than that, they just provide me with the possibility to approach the study of specific global supply chains through the lens of social relations. So as a slice, as a living slice of global capitalism, Shristi referred to this as, you're interested in the process in motion. You're not interested in a snapshot. The only way to actually capture this dynamic relation is, in fact, to bring qualitative methods in. And I would say that obviously, this being the strength, the issue of limitation is to what extent you can be sort of obviously accused to produce knowledge which is subjective. But I'd say that qualitative analysis, in fact, put in front of us really the question that research in social science is generally subjective and is like we are a big part of the story even when we pretend we are not, as researchers that do quant research and hence we control for everything. But actually there are quite funny stories of quantitative analysis on landholding in India that then have a back stories of how in some circumstances villagers can actually meet up and sort of decide what they want to say to the enumerators. You have sort of development economists that work on the ground. They have a bunch of these very funny stories that debunk the idea that quant is always the answer. So I think if something it just imposes us to deal with our positionality, which I know we will talk about shortly. So even if it's a limitation, I see it as a big callback to reality that we need to sort of listen to.
Thank you so much, Alessandra. And I think maybe what all of you have kind of, been communicating in your answers is that the direct experience of the field site, of the environment, of the social relations, of the work, of the labor was really important in your own understanding, right, of your research subjects and really deeply informed the work that you did post that field experience. So we have only sort of little more than 10 minutes before we break out for the Q&A because we also really want to hear from the audience. So I'm going to ask you one more question. And then perhaps the last question that I wanted to ask you about the advice you would give early career researchers, we leave for the end, and maybe we can touch on that in the Q&A. So, just coming back to these issues of power, positionality, reflexivity, because, sometimes you're studying up and there are certain issues that come up there, and then you're also working with marginalized, vulnerable groups at times. So, how do you think about your positionality? How can you be critical? How can you be addressing these unequal power relations? How can you not make sure you don't exploit your research subjects? Like, can you maybe share your reflections on these questions? Again, starting with you, Srishti. We are always putting you on the spot first.
So my field site is also where I'm from. I'm from Southern Haryana, and my field site was Southern Haryana. And the largest caste group among the all of the folks that I interviewed was Ahirs, which is also my caste. So for me, the questions of positionality, power, reflexivity they've been central, because in a sense, I am studying my community. But I'm not at all going to pretend that I'm on the same, plane in terms of class, in terms of in terms of social capital, cultural capital, etc. So it was a very conflicting experience in some ways. Maybe the thing that I'll say is that I don't know if I would be able to share my research with all of my all of the people that I interviewed, because the expectation, I think, from them was that because she is from the same community, she is going to present our problems, or that the picture will not be painting us in a negative light. And the fact is that what my analysis is presenting is class contradictions or antagonism often between the dominant caste and the landless communities, which is essentially Dalit communities in that region. So in that sense, it's not a very flattering put. I mean, what I'm presenting is the contradictions that exist, the social and economic contradictions that exist. And I don't know if that is going to be accepted by the majority of the folks that I interviewed. So for me, these questions are actually very much at the forefront of this entire process. I don't have answers. I think that, but I do think that it's very important to ask these questions of yourself. And I think that Alyssa is completely right that quantitative research often gives us the illusion that we are being objective, when actually every single choice that we make in quantitative research as well is completely value laden. So in that sense, what our research does is it just removes the mask and makes us ask the uncomfortable questions.
Thank you, Srishti, for so sort of honestly sharing your own dilemmas on this. Danielle, if we can turn to you.
Yeah, sure. On where do I put power and positionality? So I think that comes from my own interest in research, and all the research that I do, it's impossible for me to be neutral and not to be value laden, because that's what I aim to do with my research, is to expose exactly the power structures, the positionalities, and the institutional complexities that we see in economics as a field over history. So that's what I try to do with my research. Mm. And then I also see the consequences of that, because a lot of my colleagues don't even see me as an economist by the work that I do or with those interests.
It's an occupational hazard.
Exactly, that's where the struggle begins. But I think so. I've done some work with participants and interviews and so on, and I can see how hard it is for you sometimes to detach yourself to the research object, because we are embedded in it and our experiences count as well. But and I think this is where probably economics could benefit from what other disciplines do, because normally that's not a big issue, unless if you make that clear, you make it part of the research process, and even autoethnography can be one of the methods that you use. So it's part of the process as well. And in economics, we always strive for that neutrality, universality, and clean research process where you detach yourself. So I think we could benefit more from that, because we have so much evidence that the research that we have in economics is completely value laden and full of issues and struggles and power relations. So why not just make that explicit and bring those in? I think that would benefit everybody.
Thanks, Danielle. Alessandra?
Yeah, No, thanks. This is really a key question to continue thinking about. In my case, because I work on very complex global social formation, this question it changes entirely with the type of informants I have, because I've interviewed global buyers, their CSR offices. I interviewed so-called local exporters, which in India would be millionaires. Okay, so I sat on their houses, and so of course the issue of positionality then becomes even a strategic conversation also about how they see me and what they want exactly from me. So it's a bidirectional question at the level of the chain, where it becomes, of course, a different issue that deals with the social justice in research, is when it comes instead to a work that I've done with labor at different levels. That might be in factories or might be at the lower rungs of the chain. And on that, I have to be honest, I'm a white researcher. As I go down the chain, I become a white researcher that does research on India. So I need to accept the certain, coloniality of that. And there are ways to sit more or less comfortably with that position. Try to think in terms of what I like to call a research restitution. So what it means to give back in different ways. And this is an open question. I don't really have particularly insightful one-off answers to give. What it means to give back in context where you are being extractive, okay? There is an element to the research process whereby you want information from people. And you feel more comfortable when these people have sorts of power relations which is comparable, even higher, to yours, then instead when you go down the chain. So chain research does also that for you. You really perceive it as you change informants, that this question becomes much more charged and much more ethically problematic for you. I think the way in which I try, I'm not saying that I resolve it, but I try to address it, is to think in terms, what is it that I can give back at different levels? And for instance, for some project I did, it was collecting information that were useful to unions, where unions have no resources to go to the places where one would go with the external project money, so to work in conversation with them. In other cases, would be spending a lot of time. For instance, I come back from Narsapur, people were just wanted to spend time with me, and you give yourself in that way, and it's a way that always changes. I know that also in qualitative research, there are people that try to sort of resolve unidirectionally the issue with the issue of payments of informants. I think it can work in some contexts as a form of research restitution, but it doesn't work in all contexts. And in some contexts, people can get very offended as well. So I think ultimately the idea to reduce ethics at a tick box for our nice projects, I think it doesn't really work. Again, if we think that qualitative research make us face the reality of the process, is also in the way where it does not necessarily provide us one-off solutions, and instead it places us in front of what is effectively a highly political process that had to be navigated, I would say, with grace and recognition of what a great privilege it is to do research, because I think this is a starting point. We are privileged to do research on the world, and this world involving a variety of different people. So the idea is how can we give back in research? And this is the question that remains for me always open.
Yeah, thank you, Alessandra. And thank you for taking us from, the principle of do no harm to how you can give back, right? That's an important step that we should also be taking as feminists. So it's a great way actually to end this panel with that thought. But I just want to, before I hand over to Karthik for the Q&A, I just want to thank all of you, and particularly the panelists, for really sparking our curiosity, for stimulating us, and for inspiring us to go there and experiment and try new things and be brave. So thank you so much. It was wonderful to talk to all of you. and hope to continue the conversation. So thanks very much, and over to Karthik.
Thank you so much, Shiba, and thank you again. Yes, echoing what Shiba said about this discussion. So we'll open now the floor for Q&A. From the audience, please raise your hand, use the raise hand option if you'd like to be called on. And when you do, please introduce yourself briefly before your comments and questions. We do have a lot of questions already in the chat, but I would like to start and abuse my position by asking about something that I have personally been dealing with when communicating my mixed methods research to other researchers. Do you see a tendency among researchers to hierarchicalize within qualitative methods? So, for instance, presenting field work as stronger than archival work or archival work versus interviews? Or are qualitative researchers in general more friendly than the tendency maybe amongst quantitative researchers? And if not, how do we combat that when we're trying to do qualitative research?
Karthik, I was thinking, should we take a couple of questions at a time? Because, we have a lot of participants. We want to try and get in as many questions. And then after taking 3 questions, perhaps, the panel can decide, which ones they want to answer. Maybe not everyone answers everything. What do you say?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if anyone else would like to raise your hands, and please do. I'll read out a question from the chat from Sayama Khatun, which is, I think, speaks to the early career question. So as qualitative data collection demands longer time for investing on building rapport than structured surveys or conducting ethnographic fieldwork has always faced the challenge of getting funded for a longer time frame, besides the whole issue of it being treated as less rigorous. What is the future for looking like for qualitative research given like budget cuts that are happening in social research? And I can take one more question, I guess, that relates to in what this is by Bina Pradhan, which is relating to policy recommendation questions and how to use qualitative research to complement econometric analysis that tends to be privileged when looking at policy recommendations. So how to integrate qualitative analysis in doing policy work.
Please feel free to just unmute yourself and answer in any order if you're inspired to answer any of the questions.
I'm happy to start again if that's all right. So I'll maybe speak to the third question because that's something that we gave a little bit of thought to in that same paper with Amit and Smita. We actually found some really good examples of policy evaluation, even through, for example, experimental or quasi-experimental methods, but which used qualitative methods to either A, frame the study itself, or B, gain insights when a policy intervention isn't going the way that you expect it to. So, and that second one I think is really important. So, with a lot of policy interventions, if they're not working, I mean, that's really where quantitative data can really get you so far. That's where you need the qualitative insights. And we found some, sorry, my earphones died. But we found some very good papers in mainstream and heterodox journals which use this kind of mix, and it was actually quite effective. So you could see that the project would not have gone forward in the absence of that qualitative, intervention, which even helped sort of reformulate the policy intervention itself in a way that it could end up being effective. So I think that there's multiple ways of doing this at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of a kind of a study that's looking at evaluating policy interventions. I'll stop at that.
I can go next. Yeah, thank you for the question. So interesting. So my thoughts on them. So the first one on the hierarchy of methods. I cannot speak maybe for other fields, but in the field that I work, I think yes, there is a hierarchy, especially let's say for the more contextual interpretation, historiography work versus archival research. I think archival research tends to be more praised upon because it gives more evidence in comparison to your interpretation of a historical work, which I think it's a problem. But yes, I think that there is an unspoken hierarchy on that. And it opens issues like on the first question in terms of accessibility, costs to do field work, visit archives, scanning, and etc. And what is the future of that? I think it's really hard to maybe brush it over the carpet, but I think online accessibility is probably the only way to go. So some of the works that I did in the past, if collections were not scanned and digitized, or if I was not able to interview people online, I would not be able to do a project, because that really lowers the cost of traveling and everything. So I think that's probably an alternative, which is not great, but it was what I was able to find. But I know it's very limiting because not all participants are online available. Not all collections can be searched online. So that really limits the research that you do. And a third, how can the quals unpack quant results? So I think they answer different things. Quantitative and qualitative work, they answer very different questions, but the qualitative can really unpack some of the quantitative results you find. So something that it's significant or something that you find in the regression results that you want to unpack further and ask further questions why that's the case. I think that's what the qualitative research can help you.
Yeah, thank you. I actually think also in qualitative research there is a hierarchy, and generally the hierarchy that as we measured in anthropologies, which is the other field that I'm sort of generally in conversation with, is the amount of time you spend in a place. So as you have in economics, because I mean, also the other social sciences are very particular about purity of methods, or the methods are recognized as central to their discipline. And especially anthropology, I would say, especially in the UK, I'm not sure about other contexts, has this great emphasis on the fact that you have to spend on a field a significant amount of time before being able to open your mouth. So in a sense, I would say that then interviews are considered, yes, useful, and again, in numerical numbers. So the more interviews you do, the better your knowledge is, but still like a secondary level form of knowledge production to ethnography, which is a deep dive in, with, I would say, also consideration about the coloniality of the process that's now discussed very much, and which is a sticky issue, because one could argue, either way, depending on always how you engage in a process, I would say. So there is indeed a hierarchy there. Of course, it is more time consuming to do qualitative research, and it is why it's under attacks. And I think in generally speaking, not just the victory into inverted commas or econometrics in economics, but also of sort of rational choice type of stats use in the other social science is in response to the fact that we have these cuts and you have to complete research in a very sort of short time frame. Where I work, we have to produce PhDs in 4 years. And so, of course, all of that gets very much in the direction of time cutting, which favors quantitative analysis when it is available. And of course, this is an open question. What to do about it is just, reclaiming our university. That is a political process that has very little to do with methods, but with us going on the picket lines where we are called to do so, to sort of counter some of these pressures. In terms of the policy question I wanted to take, I would say that, qualitative analysis is fundamental for policy. I mean, the debacle of randomized control trials tells us about this, okay? So with the randomized control trials, that is an attempt to quantify or to make qualitative analysis then quantitative, but the catch-22 is that produce evidence that we already know of. So the issue is not why one policy is to be preferred than the other policy, like RTC do. The issue is why isn't the desirable policy that everybody knows about is not chosen in the first place based on the power relations that are at work in a specific context. So we need qualitative analysis to unpack this. So for policy purposes, we need to have the quant in certain respects. I'm not denying that in terms of initial sketch or outcomes, but then it's only with qual that we determine where is the direction of travel.
Thanks so much, Olivia. We'll take another round of questions. We can start with two hands up. I'll start with Nash and then Alia, and then I'll read out a question by Surbi Mishra.
Thank you, Karthik, but I think Aliyah had her hand raised before me. So Aliyah, I'll let
Okay.
you,
Yeah,
I'll let
Alia
you
and
go
then
ahead.
Nash.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes, this is Alia from Pakistan. I'm a labor economist and a retired professor of economics. Okay, the statement by Alessandra about giving back made me think of the kind of interventions that I have been trying to do with policy development forums in Pakistan, to which I have access to, is that, and it is a question also, how can we effectively link qualitative research to international development metrics like the SDGs or, other international obligations like CEDAW, because that is where, there is a hope of giving back to the communities that have been studied so deeply through qualitative research, and yet, they sort of do not get the policy focus that they deserve. So I wish there was more time to deliberate on that, but I'll stop here. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to give my input. Thank you.
So much. Nash?
Thank you, and thank you, Aliyah. I think it was great that you asked your question before me because my question is somewhat related to yours. First, to say that my training is in development studies, but I now work as a labor organizer for the street vendors for a global alliance of street vendors unions in Asia. And actually, I find that the conversation we've had this afternoon was really very stimulating and validating as well. So thank you for that. And as I was reflecting also on this idea of research restitution, I was particularly thinking about it in our context because, for example, it's very clear to us in the labor organizing experience that we do need to find a way to gather more information and analyze it. But I suppose the question I had for you was if you had experience with your interlocutors creating knowledge alongside you. Because what I found is that the tendency in academia is still to have a person, in this case the researcher, analyzing that research as if we had the tools. Whereas, like you all said, when you work in the field teaches you. And for me, I just want to know, like, as an organizer, how can I also be better at this? Because we try to do participatory action research, but I feel also that between organizing the day-to-day and doing this kind of more rigorous academic work to also lend credibility to the union work, I feel like there has to be more interaction between research and labor, for example. But just within this question of if you have reflections on just the interlocutors creating knowledge alongside you, and how do you really honor that without just seeing them as the people who we extract information from. So yes, thank you. And again, this has been wonderful. So
Uh, Thanks. And then I'll just read this last question, and then I think we'll have time after this round of responses for one last round where we can take Smita's question and then two more questions. I'd ask everyone to keep their questions brief. I'll also try to summarize the question a little bit. So this one is a little bit more into the weeds, like a little bit more into the weeds from Surbhi Mishra, asking that they wanted to work on focus group discussion and qualitative methods, but are always afraid of actually being able to transform the collected data into good analysis. So any tips on like how to get started in that and getting over the initial hurdle? So you can take those three questions and then we'll take another three after your responses.
I'll begin. On the question of how to give back, I can only say what personally has felt meaningful, and that is working at an institution where most of our students are coming from communities which are essentially underserved, and working at an institution where the majority of our students are first generation learners, and giving them the skills to become the researchers who are able to look either into their own communities or elsewhere. To me, that is one of the big ways of giving back, is a more equitable distribution of the skills of qualitative research. And often, so one of the big hurdles, and this is linked to Surbhi's question, one of the big hurdles with qualitative research is that, especially I'm talking about our context, is that the language is what deters a lot of people. They might have a lot of insight, they do have a lot of insight, but because it has to be presented in a certain way, you need all of this familiarity with the canon, that becomes the hurdle. So I'll also try to answer Surbhi's question. For me, what I found helpful was, yes, I mean, you have to read a lot. You have to read all kinds of, studies that are within that domain. And with that reading's hope, I mean, what should happen is that some kind of a structured way of thinking about your findings emerges in your head somehow. That requires a back and forth. And in my personal experience, this is where reviewers helped a lot. So you do need somebody to bounce your writing off of. And then, so having that support is crucial, I think. And it does take a couple of iterations, and you just have to get through it and produce a couple of bad drafts till you get to the good one, is my advice.
Thank you for the questions. That's an interesting discussion. Yeah, on the give back comment, yes, I agree. I think the good thing about doing qualitative research is that it also is very eye-opening to so many things. And the way I think about it is, how can I use my privileged position to be able to push for change on other things and ways which may only scratch the surface, but at least is what I can do. And on the question about interlocutors, and probably on the question about fleshing out the participants' words and what they aim to say, probably a way that I could think about is, how can you bring them closer to the research process? So rather than you having you detached as the researcher, interviewer, observer, and them as the object, bring them closer so they can give input on the actual research process. Instead of words, are there other ways that they can show you what they're trying to say, or the meaning? I think there are maybe other ways to flesh that out. And do more like participatory research, but as they could participate more on the actual design and process. Maybe that could be a possibility as well.
Okay, so on the policy, Alia's question on policy, of course, you try to sort of create knowledge that might be meaningful for the policy process, but I do not consider myself a policymaker. So then what they do or not do with that, I think sadly, when it comes to certain types of argument put forward, it might apply to qualitative research as well as it applies to quant research. There is also very progressive quant research, which does not take it does not get screened, or sometimes it gets invisibilized. There's in the UK a couple of quite glaring examples. Well, the most glaring, we've seen the BBC producing an excellent documentary on Gaza doctors to then refuse to screen it at the BBC. And then, of course, the devil is in the detail. They just won the BAFTAs for the documentary without having ever been screened. But also you find this, couple of years ago, there was an excellent report on the corporatization of early years care in the UK. Nuffield paid for the whole thing, and then Nuffield refused for 2 years to publish the findings, because the findings were that over 50% of our early year education system is corporatized, is in the hands of major corporations. So what I'm saying is, I think that is the issue, is again a political issue more than related to methods per se. On the issue raised by Nash on restitution, that to me entirely also depends on context. So I have co-published in the past with, for instance, in India, CVDEP activists. It's part of my practice to sort of co-publish when I think there is still key inputs provided by activists. At the same time, I don't think we should really trivialize this question when it comes to the workers whose narratives we actually gather, because then it becomes a bit of a posturing thing, okay? The majority of the workers I worked alongside don't really care about co-publishing with me, okay? So that it becomes almost a voyeuristic sort of attitude to pretend that it would be otherwise, while instead they understand restitution in different ways. The workers that with the ILO interviewed and tried to get a sense of which were the reasons for their industrial grievances. These are workers that put in grievances against their employers, were more interested in this being available to other workers. So at that point, for instance, we created a repository where these grievances can be located. So when I say that it's an open question, it's like it depends on the actual context that you talk about. It's important to have it open, and it can be resolved in many different ways. But certainly I agree with you that if you work with a labor organization, which is central to how you get information on the ground, you should find ways to actually also make sure that it's clear that that evidence is co-produced.
Thanks so much, Alessandra. So we are only 5 more minutes. So I'm going to ask Snita to, if you could ask your question, try to be as brief as possible. Try to keep it to, quick glance, and then also the respondents, keep your responses brief. Thank you.
Thanks, Karthik. I'll do my best. Thanks very much to the panelists. Really informative, really excellent. I think you've all touched upon the thing that I'm going to ask about in various ways, but I was just hoping, to get a little more like fine-grained response if possible. So I guess my question is, you've all talked about positionality, right? So I'm curious about how positionality might impact the information that you're able to obtain in the first place from the field, particularly in contexts that are highly gendered or maybe highly caste segregated or religious, religiously divided and so forth, right, with the social divisions. And Daniela talked about like creating, like having triangulation and so forth. And so I guess my question is, to what extent is a holistic, triangulable, if that's a word, picture even possible or desirable when doing qualitative research, considering that multiple social realities can sort of, coexist? So yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Smita. And my final question is the standard question of what advice would you give to early career researchers interested in in qualitative methods and how to go about it? Yeah, so you have about 1 minute each, I guess, to respond.
Smita, it's unfair for you to ask this question at the very end. So somebody had said this earlier, but yeah, you just have to get multiple entry points into the field. I think for me, at least, that's what kind of worked. But it will not. So in village study, because you have made your appearance as the researcher, there will be perceptions about you, word will spread, etc. So it's not possible to present a completely blank picture of yourself at the different entry points, but that's the attempt. And even getting, for example, multiple perspectives on the same thing, I think that itself is revealing. Of course, not all of it is going to coincide, and it's not, but that itself is, I think, the interesting part of fieldwork. Advice to early career scholars: it will be painful, you will be going against the tide, there will not be immediate rewards, but there is a lot of engagement at the interstices of different disciplines. There may not be a whole lot in economics as of now, but there is a lot of interest at the interstices of economics with development studies, geography, sociology, etc. So maybe we also need to look at a broader audience till economics catches up.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief as well. Smita, very deep questions for a minute for me to answer, but I'll do my best as well. On the positionality and access, at least that's the good thing about doing historical research, because at least it's in the past. And it's much easier for me to access materials. But when I do participatory research, I have faced a few situations where I think my position, I think participants wouldn't share everything that they thought about. But I just tried to be clear on where I was standing, what I was coming from. And I said, it's okay for you not to want to share, but whatever insight you can give me, great. And then I'll just add to my research findings or discussion that limitation as well. I always try to make that clear whenever possible. And the limitation of triangulation, yes, it's something that I also struggle myself, because it's an infinite amount of possibilities on how much you can triangulate and what and where. And a box always opens another box, and then another one, and then another one. But yeah, I don't know how to answer, because it's something I also struggle as well. But I try to keep it within what I proposed, and further paths for research maybe will become another project or another paper or something else. Advice for careers, I would say the same. Be persistent. It's a hard path, but it's very rewarding. And you can be happy outside economics as well. And we can also change economics. So we can learn so much from other fields. And that's what we aim to do, to bring other schools of thought, perspectives, disciplines into economics. And I think this only benefits what we do. So hopefully, by more people doing this, and hopefully we can kick the door from journals and the other gatekeepers, we're going to be able to put some more space on qualitative research in our discipline.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Smita, for this big question. This is an entire seminar, but I would say that the people that just at the beginning, especially now, stuff has changed dramatically. I started my research in 2003, where I could benefit more from their own assumptions about me were exporters that took me as a buyer, because not just because I'm white, because I'm Italian. And so basically Italian women must be interested in fashion and must be interested in starting a small startup somewhere in the subcontinent. So it's really interesting what it tells what qualitative research tells you about yourself and how people see you. And all the amount of information that I ended up collecting that I considered at the beginning superfluous about product cycles and the different samples has become instead a crucial part of the story that I wanted to tell, because it's connected to different labor processes. So as I said, you are part of the process in ways that you will discover. So I hope it starts answering your question. What I will tell people is do more of qual research, because you discover the word, but you also discover yourself in the process. And as this is a feminist economics seminar, I think it's fair to sort of end with the remembering, sort of trying to remember feminist economists, that we started all of this because we have to challenge economics and political economy as a discipline. So we do not have to let it change us by adopting exactly the same models that the discipline, that constructed the discipline in the way that it is. So qual and the use of qualitative methods is in fact a way to remain truthful to what the feminist economics project has been about since the beginning.
Thank you so much. So we are about 2 minutes over time, so we can close now. Thank you again to all of our panelists and to Sheba for moderating as well, for those reflections and all the valuable things that have been shared today. It's clear there's a demand for this, as well as a lot more to do. So we will be doing that. And so thank you again to Ashma, Myra, Paulina, and our translators, Estefania and Mercedes, and to all of you for attending. Please keep an eye out for our upcoming online events in this series track, as well as Sheba mentioned the event at Cali for those of you who are attending. A reminder, registration is still open. Please also follow IAFI on its social media, as well as the YouTube channel where all of these events will be uploaded. And please also do sign up for the newsletter if you haven't already done so, to remain informed for future events as well. Thank you. We can end the recording now, Myra, and we can leave.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for
Especially to
organizing.
Stefania in the background with us talking so fast. I